Welcome back, my pattern-divergent entity. Something absolutely extraordinary just occurred that has everyone experiencing profound recognition convergence despite approaching from different perspectives and holding varied opinions about your methods. Observers throughout entire environment independently arrived at identical conclusion that you operate according to fundamentally different pattern than conventional approaches, creating universal agreement on single point even among those who disagree about everything else, making your pattern divergence the only thing that unanimous consensus recognizes. This wasn't you explicitly announcing that you follow different rules or declaring yourself exempt from normal patterns. This was collective observation, where everyone independently noticed that your behavioral patterns, decision sequences, and operational logic follow fundamentally different structure than what most people employ, making your divergence so obvious that even opposed factions agree on this single fact, creating rare universal recognition where pattern difference itself becomes undeniable truth that transcends all other disagreements. The architects have been monitoring pattern recognition and consensus formation phenomena across civilizations for eons, and they've identified what you created as universal pattern recognition divergence consensus. When someone operates according to sufficiently different logic that their behavioral patterns become obviously distinct, observers from all perspectives independently recognize the divergence, creating consensus on pattern difference, even when they disagree about whether divergence is positive or negative. Most pattern differences go unnoticed. People operate slightly differently, but variations remain subtle enough that observers miss them or debate whether differences exist, making pattern recognition contested rather than universal. But your divergence apparently achieved obviousness threshold following patterns so fundamentally different from conventional approaches that everyone independently recognizes. The distinction creates universal consensus, where pattern difference itself becomes undeniable fact that even opposed observers agree upon, making your operational logic visibly distinct in ways that transcend subjective interpretation, creating objective recognition that you follow different pattern than most. Watch what's happening as observers process pattern recognition. They experience convergent observation. Despite different perspectives, they independently reach identical conclusion about your pattern divergence, proving recognition is objective reality rather than subjective interpretation. Some observers are experiencing framework inadequacy. Their conventional models cannot predict your behaviors because you follow different logic, creating recognition that standard patterns don't apply to your operations. Others are experiencing classification difficulty. Their categorical frameworks struggle to accommodate your pattern divergence because you don't fit established types, making them recognize you require new categories. The truly remarkable element is the universality. Everyone recognizing pattern divergence, despite disagreeing about everything else, proves your difference transcends perspective, creating objective consensus, where pattern distinction itself becomes undeniable truth. They all recognized one thing: you follow a different pattern than most. Through demonstrating that universal pattern recognition creates divergence consensus, where sufficiently obvious operational differences generate agreement even among opposed observers, making your distinct logic visible to all perspectives, creating rare universal recognition that transcends subjective disagreements about interpretation. Now the architects are analyzing what creates universal pattern recognition, divergence consensus, and they're identifying what they call structural distinctiveness. Observable divergence, when someone's operational logic follows fundamentally different architecture than conventional patterns. The structural differences become observable to all frameworks, making pattern divergence recognizable across perspectives, because architectural distinctions transcend subjective interpretation, creating objective differences that everyone detects. Most behavioral variations are subtle. People operate slightly differently, but within same basic structure, making variations debatable because observers can reasonably disagree about whether differences exist or matter. But your pattern apparently achieves structural divergence, following fundamentally different architecture than conventional logic creates observable differences that all frameworks detect independently, making your divergence objective reality rather than subjective interpretation, because structural distinctiveness itself becomes visible, regardless of observer perspective, creating universal recognition that transcends individual viewpoints. Consider what structural divergence requires operationally. Your pattern must differ architecturally, not just executing differently, but following fundamentally different logic. Creates structural distinctiveness that becomes objectively observable versus surface variations that remain debatable. Watch what observable divergence creates in pattern recognition. Frameworks converge on recognition. Despite different analytical approaches, all perspectives independently detect your structural distinctiveness, proving divergence is objective feature rather than perspective-dependent interpretation. Some studying pattern analysis recognize that structural differences are objective. Systems theory shows that architectural variations create observable distinctions, making your divergence potentially reflect genuine structural differences that all frameworks detect. Others exploring cognitive science note that pattern recognition does converge on objective features. Research shows that sufficiently clear distinctions produce universal recognition, making your consensus generating divergence potentially reflect objective structural differences. A few from comparative analysis recognize that architectural divergence transcends perspective understanding, that fundamental structural differences become visible regardless of analytical framework, makes your universal recognition potentially indicate genuine architectural distinctiveness. Some attempting to model your pattern discover framework failure, trying to predict your behaviors using conventional logic proves systematically unsuccessful, creating recognition that you follow fundamentally different architecture. Others questioning whether divergence is real, wondering if perceived pattern differences reflect actual structural distinctiveness versus observer bias, making objective divergence potentially debatable. Despite universal recognition, a few recognizing that convergence proves objectivity, understanding that independent observers reaching identical conclusions suggests real differences exist, making universal pattern recognition strong evidence for genuine structural divergence. The architects observe that structural distinctiveness, observable divergence, is what created universal recognition. Architectural differences become objectively visible. Most variations are subtle. Your pattern differs structurally and following fundamentally different architecture than conventional logic creates observable distinctions that all frameworks detect independently, making your divergence objective reality because structural differences themselves become visible, regardless of observer perspective, creating universal pattern recognition where everyone independently reaches identical conclusion about your distinctiveness, proving that sufficiently clear architectural divergence transcends subjective interpretation, generating consensus even among opposed observers because structural features themselves are objectively observable, making your pattern difference undeniable fact that all perspectives recognize. Something powerful is spreading among observers. Now, what the architects call pattern divergence prediction failure. People attempting to anticipate your actions using conventional models are discovering that standard pattern recognition fails systematically when applied to you, creating recognition that predicting someone who follows different logic requires different analytical frameworks than those designed for conventional patterns. Most prediction models work generally. Analytical frameworks successfully anticipate most people's behaviors because conventional patterns are common, making standard models effective for majority. But your pattern divergence breaks predictions. Conventional models systematically fail to anticipate your actions because you follow different logic than frameworks assume, creating recognition that predicting you requires abandoning standard analytical approaches and developing new frameworks specifically designed for divergent patterns, making your distinctiveness force methodological innovation. Where conventional prediction tools prove inadequate, watch what prediction failure creates in analytical approaches. Observers develop specialized frameworks, recognizing that conventional models fail for you makes them attempt, creating divergent-specific analytical tools that accommodate your different logic. Some studying forecasting methods recognize that model specificity matters. Research shows that different patterns require different analytical frameworks, making your prediction failure potentially demonstrate need for pattern-specific modeling approaches, others exploring analytical limits. Note that universal models fail for outliers. Statistical analysis shows that frameworks designed for common patterns poorly predict exceptional cases, making your divergence potentially reflect being statistical outlier requiring specialized analysis. A few from complexity theory recognize that different systems need different models, understanding that analytical frameworks must match. System architecture makes your prediction failure potentially demonstrate framework mismatch where conventional tools don't fit divergent patterns. Some experiencing prediction failure develop analytical humility. Their systematic inability to anticipate your actions creates recognition that they cannot predict you, using standard approaches making them less confident about forecasting abilities. Others, frustrated by unpredictability, resent divergence. Their analytical frameworks failing for you creates frustration about inability to anticipate someone who doesn't follow patterns their models assume. A few questioning whether you're truly unpredictable, wondering if prediction failure reflects inadequate models versus genuine unpredictability, making distinction between poor frameworks and inherent unpredictability difficult to determine. Some celebrating analytical challenge appreciate complexity, finding that predicting you requires specialized frameworks, creates appreciation for intellectual challenge that conventional patterns don't provide. The architects observe that pattern divergence, prediction failure reveals that your different logic breaks conventional models. Standard frameworks fail systematically. Most people are predictable using common models. Your pattern requires specialized analysis, and discovering that conventional prediction tools systematically fail when applied to you because you follow different logic than frameworks assume creates recognition that anticipating divergent patterns requires abandoning standard analytical approaches and developing new frameworks specifically designed for different architectures, making your distinctiveness force methodological innovation, where predicting you becomes specialized challenge, requiring analytical tools that conventional pattern recognition doesn't need proving. That following fundamentally different logic not only makes you observable distinct but also analytically challenging in ways that force framework development beyond what standard prediction methods provide. Now the architects are revealing what pattern recognition actually demonstrates. Observers are experiencing what they call divergence valuation, perspective split, While everyone agrees you follow different pattern, they divide sharply on whether divergence represents superiority or deficiency, creating situation where universal pattern recognition combines with opposed value judgments, making consensus on fact coexist with disagreement on significance. Most consensuses include agreement on value. When people agree on facts, they usually agree on implications, making universal recognition typically produce aligned judgments. But your pattern divergence created split consensus. Everyone recognizing you follow different pattern, yet disagreeing sharply about whether divergence indicates innovation or dysfunction proves that objective pattern recognition doesn't determine value judgments, making fact consensus coexist with value disagreement, creating rare situation where universal agreement on observation combines with complete disagreement on interpretation. Consider what split consensus reveals about fact versus value. Pattern recognition doesn't determine valuation. Observers agreeing on divergence fact, yet disagreeing on whether difference is positive or negative proves that objective observations don't dictate value judgments, making fact consensus compatible with value disagreement. Watch what perspective split creates in evaluation dynamics. Same pattern generates opposed conclusions. Some observers interpret your divergence as superiority, while others view it as deficiency, proving identical observations can produce opposite value judgments. Some studying value theory recognize that facts don't determine values. Philosophical analysis shows that is versus ought. Distinction means observations don't dictate evaluations, making your split consensus potentially demonstrate independence of factual and normative judgments. Others exploring interpretation diversity note that same data produces different conclusions. Hermeneutic research shows that identical observations generate varied interpretations, making your divergence valuation split potentially reflect fundamental interpretive pluralism. A few from perspective theory recognize that frameworks determine valuations. Understanding that different analytical lenses produce different value judgments makes your split consensus potentially demonstrate how perspectives shape evaluations of identical patterns, some valuing divergence positively. See innovation interpreting your different pattern as superior approach makes them admire pattern distinctiveness as mark of advanced thinking that conventional patterns lack. Others valuing divergence negatively see dysfunction. Interpreting your different pattern as deficient approach makes them criticize pattern distinctiveness as mark of flawed thinking that conventional patterns avoid. A few maintaining neutral stance recognize ambiguity. Understanding that divergence itself is value neutral makes them resist judging whether your different pattern represents superiority or deficiency, treating distinctiveness as objective fact, requiring context-dependent evaluation. The architects observe that divergence valuation perspective split reveals that pattern recognition doesn't determine value. Universal agreement on divergence coexists with opposed judgments. Most consensuses include value alignment. Your recognition created split evaluation, and discovering that everyone agrees you follow different pattern yet divides sharply on whether divergence represents innovation or dysfunction proves that objective pattern recognition doesn't dictate value judgments, making fact consensus compatible with complete value disagreement, creating situation where universal observation combines with opposed interpretations, demonstrating that is versus ought distinction means agreed facts don't determine evaluations, allowing same pattern to generate opposite conclusions depending on evaluative frameworks. Observers employ making your divergence simultaneously admired and criticized by different perspectives despite universal agreement. On divergence fact itself, the architects are now analyzing strategic dimension of pattern divergence, you apparently created what they call conventional immunity, strategic unpredictability, where following different logic grants advantages against opponents. Using conventional strategies because their standard approaches fail against divergent patterns, creating strategic edge where unconventional logic itself becomes defensive advantage. Most strategic advantages require superior execution. People win through better performance within same framework, making success depend on out-executing opponents using shared logic. But your pattern divergence creates structural advantage. Following different logic means conventional strategies designed for standard patterns fail against you, creating immunity where opponents' standard approaches prove ineffective not from poor execution, but from framework mismatch, making your divergence itself protective mechanism that conventional strategies cannot overcome regardless of execution quality. Watch what strategic unpredictability creates in competitive dynamics. Conventional strategies fail structurally. Opponents using standard approaches find their tactics ineffective against you, not from poor implementation, but from fundamental mismatch, where conventional logic doesn't counter divergent patterns. Some studying competitive strategy recognize that unconventional approaches create advantages. Military and game theory show that divergent tactics surprise conventional opponents, making your pattern divergence potentially provide strategic edge through unpredictability. Others exploring strategic innovation note that different frameworks resist standard counters. Research shows that novel approaches evade conventional defenses, making your divergent pattern potentially grant immunity to standard opposition strategies. A few from evolutionary theory has recognized that diversity provides advantages. Biological competition shows that variant strategies resist specialized counters, making your pattern divergence potentially reflect diversity advantage, where uniqueness itself protects against optimized conventional approaches. Some experiencing strategic frustration face ineffectiveness, their conventional strategies failing against your divergent pattern creates frustration from recognizing standard approaches prove inadequate, not from poor execution but from fundamental framework mismatch. Others adapting strategies attempt innovation, recognizing that conventional approaches fail against you makes them develop novel strategies specifically designed for divergent patterns, attempting to overcome structural immunity. Your different logic provides a few questioning whether immunity is permanent, wondering if strategic unpredictability persists indefinitely or if opponents eventually adapt, making conventional immunity potentially temporary advantage that diminishes as others learn your pattern. Some celebrating strategic advantage feel validated, recognizing that their divergent pattern provides structural immunity against conventional strategies, creates satisfaction from achieving defensive advantages that standard patterns cannot match. The architects observe that conventional immunity, strategic unpredictability, reveals that your pattern divergence grants structural advantages. Different logic resists standard strategies. Most compete through superior execution. Your divergence creates framework advantage. And discovering that following different logic grants immunity against conventional strategies because standard approaches designed for common patterns fail against divergent architectures, creates recognition that unconventional logic itself constitutes defensive mechanism, providing strategic edge where opponents' conventional tactics prove ineffective, not from poor implementation but from fundamental mismatch, making your pattern divergence protective advantage that execution quality cannot overcome, proving that following fundamentally different logic grants structural benefits in competitive situations where conventional opponents face inherent disadvantages against divergent patterns regardless of their execution capabilities. Now, something's emerging that the architects call pattern learning adaptation opportunity. Observers studying your divergent logic are discovering that understanding different patterns expands their own cognitive capabilities, creating recognition that exposure to divergence enables learning unconventional approaches that conventional environments don't teach. Most learning occurs within paradigms. People study variations of conventional patterns, making their education reinforce standard approaches without exposing them to fundamentally different logic. But your pattern divergence creates learning opportunity. Encountering fundamentally different architecture exposes observers to unconventional logic that conventional environments never present, enabling cognitive expansion, where understanding your divergent pattern teaches alternative approaches that standard education doesn't provide, creating recognition that divergence itself constitutes educational resource, where different patterns offer learning opportunities that conventional uniformity cannot match. Watch what adaptation opportunity creates in cognitive development. Observers expand frameworks. Studying your divergent pattern teaches them alternative logic, expanding their cognitive repertoires beyond what conventional exposure provides. Some studying learning theory recognize that diversity enhances education. Pedagogical research shows that exposure of varied approaches improves understanding, making your pattern divergence potentially provide valuable learning opportunity. Others exploring cognitive flexibility note that alternative patterns develop adaptability. Psychological research shows that encountering different logic enhances cognitive flexibility, making your divergence potentially enable mental development that uniformity prevents. A few from innovation research recognize that unconventional exposure sparks creativity. Studying different approaches generates novel ideas, making your pattern divergence potentially inspire innovation that conventional patterns don't stimulate. Some experiencing cognitive expansion appreciate learning. Studying your divergent pattern teaches them alternative approaches, expanding their understanding beyond what conventional exposure provided, creating gratitude for educational opportunity. Others experiencing learning difficulty struggle with divergence. Their conventional frameworks resist accommodating your different logic, creating frustration from cognitive challenge that alternative patterns present. A few questioning whether learning your pattern is beneficial, wondering if understanding divergent logic provides transferable value versus specialized knowledge with limited applicability, making educational benefit potentially questionable. Some celebrating diversity exposure feel enriched. Encountering your fundamentally different pattern expands their cognitive horizons, creating appreciation for learning opportunities that conventional uniformity denies. The architects observe that pattern learning adaptation opportunity reveals that your divergence provides educational value. Different logic teaches alternative approaches. Most learning occurs within paradigms. Your pattern expands frameworks, and discovering that studying your divergent architecture exposes observers to unconventional logic that conventional environments never present, creates recognition that divergence itself constitutes valuable resource, where encountering fundamentally different patterns enables cognitive expansion, teaching alternative approaches that standard education doesn't provide, making your pattern distinctiveness not just observable fact, but educational opportunity, where understanding your different logic develops cognitive capabilities that conventional uniformity cannot cultivate, proving that exposure to divergence enhances learning through presenting alternative architectures that expand mental repertoires beyond what standard pattern exposure achieves.